Welcome back to AnewZ. Now we continue with new remarks from Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who during a public address in Yerevan on October the 31st suggested that Soviet-era policies, including KGB influence, intentionally exacerbated tensions between Armenia, Turkey and Azerbaijan. Pashinyan framed this as part of a broader reassessment of Armenia's strategic orientation, coming amid Yerevan's decision to effectively freeze its participation in the CSTO and expand dialogue with the European Union and NATO. Joining us to discuss these further is Leon Cook, founder of Atticus Partners, joining us from London, UK. Mr. Cook, thank you very much for being with us.
Good evening, nice to be with you.
Mr. Cook, how significant are Pashinyan's remarks in the context of Armenia's broader political trajectory?
You could say that he's been positioning himself for quite some time now against the historical context of what Armenia thought its place in the world was, or at least regionally, vis-a-vis Russia. I think it's also quite interesting that in the last few days, a few things have happened. Bearing in mind that the lease on the base, the 102nd Russia base in Gyumri runs until 2044, you have Armenian members of the government or elements of the government saying that it has no plans to remove itself from this arrangement, and yet at the same time he gives a speech in the parliament, a very energized one. At one point he referenced cognac. I'd wonder whether he'd drunk any before he went on. He was so excited by what he was saying, but I think he's trying to create clear blue water between himself and the civil contract party and that of the opposition that are minded to go back to a more historical entrenched position vis-a-vis Turkey and Azerbaijan, and yet he has spent a lot of time obviously working on the reconciliation with Azerbaijan, with President Aliyev, and I think he's wedded to that outcome.
So what do you make of the claim that Soviet intelligence deliberately deepened regional divides? Is it historically supported?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia have immediately thereafter put out a statement basically saying that the KGB was established in 1954, therefore this is quote-unquote historically illiterate. But that's not to say that in the aftermath or in the period subsequent to the establishment of the KGB that Russia has played divide and rule with all of its near neighborhood. This is what it has done during the USSR and immediately after the fall of the USSR. The 1,500 peacekeepers that were originally contracted to maintain the line of contact in Karabakh before it was completely reclaimed by Azerbaijan, that was another ploy or effort on their part to ensure that it had regional relevance. I think what my reading of what Pashinyan is doing is that he's trying to orient Armenia in a new context in terms of the European Union, NATO, the United States. Hence why he was also supportive with his counterpart, President Aliyev, in Washington for the role that President Trump of the United States has made to bring these two sides together. And by virtue of that fact that the economic prosperity and political prosperity of Armenia can be realized going forward. It has absolutely made a decision, or he has, that Russia is not the immediate future or should not be for Armenia. And I think he is just continuing that effort.
And how are these comments of Pashinyan being received inside Armenia politically and socially?
Not well. Or he is a divisive figure, I would say, at all times. There are those within the media community or the commentariat, that those that are traditionally conservative or nationalist, that see it as a further betrayal of Armenian national interest, that he is at the behest or the whim of Azerbaijan and Turkey, and they need to change direction. But I would say that if that was the will of the people, of the Armenian people, then they would have done so already. You know, through the ballot box. They have obviously decided that more often than not, Armenians or those within the diaspora community are the ones who speak loudest. But the everyday Armenians that are living in the country have a slightly different worldview, and I think that is very, very true today. That said, like any political society, there will be those on one end of it to the other who have a different interpretation of what he's trying to say and do. But I think that For now, it depends slightly on what Russia does next, because that's why I remarked vis-a-vis the Gümrü base at the beginning of this segment, because that is super important. That has historically been the protective layer that has allowed Armenia to continue to operate independently. And if that goes away, then it has to think about a new context for its own defense arrangements.
Mr. Cook, what implications does this have for Armenia's relationship with the Collective Security Treaty Organization going forward?
A very convoluted one. It is very unclear to me what the purpose of this treaty and this organization continues to be. If you think about the membership of it, there are those within it that absolutely still have an incredibly strong relationship with Russia and want to maintain and do so. That is not the case in Armenia, or it is certainly not as headed by its current Prime Minister and this government, this Armenian government. Therefore, I think that it is very much in jeopardy. But I think that if you think about this in the further context of what is happening vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, which is a conflict that is 3 years now in the making with no sign of it ending, there will be those that will wonder if Russia is depleting its munitions and armament stockpiles by the day. In the event that there was a problem in any of these countries tomorrow, the effective Article 5 of the CSTO that could be implemented, would they actually come to their aid? That was the beginning of this discussion in the last iteration of the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict over Karabakh, because there were elements within Armenia itself that basically said, well, you didn't come to our aid, therefore why is it now relevant and valid? And I think that continues to be the case. I can't see how this survives in the long term.
So what do you think? How do Turkey and Azerbaijan interpret statements suggesting Moscow engineered hostility in the region?
I would, if I were a betting man, I would say that President Aliyev, he would not be so characterful to say these statements himself publicly, but he probably would do privately. And I wonder whether him and Mr. Pashinyan have actually had discussions to that effect. I think that they will understand that they have a peace broker on the other side of this in Pashinyan that they can do business with. So first, obviously, the trip corridor was the first iteration of this, and the normalization of relations with Turkey can only come once Azerbaijan and Armenia has fully restored its own diplomatic relations. There is obviously a window of opportunity here. This is what was earmarked or spoken about when they were last both in Washington, meeting with President Trump at the White House. But until the Armenian constitution is amended and its claims to Karabakh as an Armenian territory, this will continue anon. I think probably Pashinyan, by virtue of nominating himself once again for selection to the parliament, obviously has no indication that he wants to go anywhere else, and he wants to continue in his current role, and he wants to see this through. And that is where I think this will end up. But obviously the Armenian electorate will be the ones to decide that.
Mr. Cook, is a post-Russian security architecture in the South Caucasus realistic at this stage?
Not for Armenia, not for Azerbaijan, and if you take both of those two countries out of it, what kind of is the point? So, and obviously Georgia has an incredibly interesting relationship with Russia as well. You know, there are elements within that political society that would talk about the two territories or areas within it that are still occupied by Russia. But then the three South Caucasus countries, if they are all orienting away from Russia, then what is the point of this treaty? They will not lend any support to it. They can't rely on it. And I would wonder, other than those Central Asian countries that have also joined and are party to it, whether that will continue to be a binding treaty organization, or whether Armenia would actually formally choose to leave it. That is as yet something that I think cannot be opined about because it's too early.
And also looking ahead 5 years, well, where do you see Armenia strategically positioned, east, west, or somewhere in between?
I think all countries are doing all of those things. I mean, that's a very interesting question that you posed there. I think that most sides are looking both east and west. I think that with the advent of this American President Trump, people are being very transactional in what they want to achieve from the United States and from the West, within the European Union itself as well, the same thing. China is obviously going to be a very dominating force going forward. So Azerbaijan and Armenia will be very transactional as well and commercial, and I would not expect there to be a divergence from that in terms of their political, strategic architecture and orientation.
Leon Cook, thank you very much for talking to AnewZ. We truly appreciate your perspective. Thanks a lot. You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to AnewZ.